There you go,
All
Dan.
right. Thank you everyone for joining me today. My name is Dan Reed with SCORE Maine. If you're unfamiliar with SCORE, we are a small business mentoring service where we provide free one-on-one mentoring to small businesses and entrepreneurs such as yourself. We also do workshops where we get experts in the industry to come and talk to us about small business adjacent topics, just like this one today, which is sales, how to get more customers now. I want to say thank you to the Maine Technology Institute, who is a huge sponsor of SCORE, and their support allows us to put on workshops just like this one for free. And with that, I want to pass it over to Tom Morgan, our presenter today, to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about what we're going to talk about today.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much, Dan. And this is kind of one of my quarterly highlights every quarter because I really do enjoy working with SCORE. I really enjoy working with all the number of different businesses at different phases of your journey. And so this has always been a fun workshop for me. So hopefully you enjoy it and you get some things out of it. So a little bit about me, just so you know how I came to SCORE. I've been in sales. I think I'm being generous in the 25 years, but I've been in successful sales management now for well over 25 years. I've worked mostly in the consumer product space, and at the end of my corporate career, I became a fractional VP of sales, working with a company called Sales Acceleration. And through this, consulting business, I've helped to serve small and mid-sized businesses throughout Maine, really on their sales strategy, sales process, sales execution, sales structure. So a lot of issues that are facing, businesses as they start looking at their sales. And additionally, recently, 2 years ago, I became the director of the Center for Sales Excellence here at the University of New England in Biddeford, which is where I'm at today. If you look at the backdrop, I'm not in prison. I'm in just an office here at the University of New England. So I'm helping students. You might not know this, but 50% of business students, their first job is in sales. So I'm helping students here lean into the sales career versus looking at it as a fallback. So it's a lot of fun. I also teach a couple sales courses here. So I like to think of myself as sales is being something that is noble and is fun. But for many of you who haven't been in sales, what I do want you to know that this is not what sales is. And I think a lot of people get scared of sales because they think of it that you're going to try to get somebody into a used Chevy Impala today. And while auto sales are a noble profession as well, that perception is something that we really do want to work to try to alleviate, because sales is a lot more than just trying to pursue, to convince someone to buy something. And that's what I'm going to get through here, on this workshop here today. Because to me, sales can be scary for many of you. If you're joining this workshop, it's because there's something in your business. You might have a great idea, you might have a great concept, you might have a product you really believe in, and now it's time for you to go sell. So I know sales can be scary. So here's the first thing you need to know, and this comes from an entrepreneur named Gary Vaynerchuk, so an entrepreneur like many of you on the call. The best salesperson is your biggest believer. So that's you. If you're on this call and you started a business or you started a consulting practice or you're doing something, you are your biggest believer and you are going to be your best salesperson. And I can tell you many times I find people that I'm going to do all this work in research and development. I'm going to do all this work in product production. I'm going to do all this work. And then I'm going to go hire someone to go take care of the sales. Well, that typically doesn't work because the best salesperson is your biggest believer, and that's you. The next key thing in sales you really need to grasp, and I was recently through my college, I was with a CEO of a growing company in Andover, Massachusetts, and I was talking to the CEO, and I said, "What piece of advice can you give to our students, about sales?" And his remark was, "Some will, some won't. So what?" And that's one thing you do learn in sales is that, in baseball, if you get 3 hits and 10 at bats, you're in the Hall of Fame. In sales, that could be as low as 1 in 10, but you can still be in the Sales Hall of Fame. So you really have to get to enough no's to get to enough yeses, and it's going to take a lot of touches. And that's okay. That's what you get used to in sales. I was working, through SCORE and through the Maine Center of Entrepreneurs with someone, and it took them 75 touches to get the meeting they needed to land their product at Trader Joe's. So that's okay. It was worth the pursuit. They changed their strategy, and we're going to get into some of that, through this workshop. But it's going to take a lot of touches, and that's it. So the expectations are clear. Some will, some won't. So what? And it's taking on that attitude. It could have been the wrong day. It could have been the wrong moment. It could be not yet. So don't take someone not being interested at the moment as being a no, or there's something wrong with your product or service. It might not be the right customer, it might not be the right fit. So I like to tell people this is a great attitude to have. Some will, some won't. So what? And Dan, I'll trust you if there's questions along the way. Please, put them in the chat, and Dan can interrupt me to answer the question because I'm kind of looking at my screen more so than the chart. So a lot of people ask me, what's the difference between sales and marketing? And really, to simplify it, I like to look at it that marketing is one to many. So it's easy to hit a button and send out an ad or an email to 100, 200 people. But at the end of the day, sales is one to one. And you have to get in front of, one person or a small group of people and convince them that your product, your service, your practice, whatever it is something that should be of interest to them. So what we focus on in this workshop is that one-to-one. And, it is interesting. And, people have asked me through the years, why do salespeople make so much more money than marketing people? And it's the trait of being one-to-one, of actually sitting in a room and finding a solution for the person you're talking about, building that deep personal relationship that builds that trust. That's why sales is the one-to-one, and that's why in many cases sales can be a lucrative career. So there's a company, Gartner, which is actually a very strong consulting firm. They do a lot of work in the sales and operation and the supply chain space. And they basically in 2024, did a study and said that right now, in this period of time, the three top sales competencies that a person needs to be highly successful in sale are this. And the first is human abilities such as active listening and empathy. And I know Bob's on the call, has been in sales as long as I have. I think, I never would have thought in 1990 that I would be saying in 2026 that active listening and empathy are the number one skills, but they really are. And in the environment you're going out to and for your practice or whatever you're doing, active listening and empathy is going to be extremely important. The second thing is that tactical flexibility, the ability to learn what your customer is looking for and be agile and versatile in your approach, right? So you're going to have a great idea, you're going to have a concept, but you know what? It's listen to your customer, and as you build that empathy, have that tactical flexibility to meet them where they're at. And the third thing, and I just got off a call just now with the Texas Christian University, and it's basically about how you can collaborate with technology and AI to help you optimize tasks and messaging. And in the sales world, there's a lot of talk about how AI can be helpful, but also can it replace salespeople? And because of the one-to-one aspects, I don't think you can create an AI sales team, but you can use AI to help you bend time, as we like to use in the sales world, which is it can help you optimize tasks. It can help you with to streamline messages. And, I mentioned earlier where you might have to make 20, 30 touches, and AI could help you, cater and customize those touches. You can feed, your messaging to AI saying, this is the 13th time I've reached out to this person. Can you give me a suggestion on how to frame the discussion? And AI can bring that back to you. So you're not, banging your head against the wall trying to figure out, how to message 15, 16 times. That's a good place, a good tool to use AI to help with your messaging. So those are the three key things. And using those, and as I go through today, we're going to talk a lot about that because those are the key things that you have to learn and look through. So I'm not going to take the time to show the video because I'm not that technically savvy, but if you do have a chance and have some time, especially if you're a startup business, there's a video on YouTube. It's Sarah Blakely, who's the founder of Spanx. and it's a video of how she sold Neiman Marcus. So Neiman Marcus is obviously a very high-end department store, very hard to get in, and Spanx was basically an undergarment company that anybody could make. And how she positioned her brand and how she, got into Neiman Marcus has set her on a path to be $1 billion company. So the link will be in the presentation that Dan shares later. But I know it's lunchtime, but it's a great video on her simple message is she called them. She just consistently called them and was prepared. So there's a gentleman by the name of Simon Sinek. And he really talks about how great leaders can inspire action, and he's something that in the world of sales we're using quite a bit. And I like to say that customers buy why you do what you do. They give you a purchase order, they give you money for what you make. So I like to look at the golden circle more as the why you do what you do, what's the purpose, as the most important piece, of your sales strategy. Because that why allows you to connect with your customers, to identify your customers, which is what I'm going to get into next. Because really what you're trying to do is you're trying to find customers that believe what you believe, that feel how you feel. Because when you're doing that, you're talking to an audience that's going to be more receptive, more interested, more engaged, and in the long run, be a better long-term customer for you. Because customer retention versus customer acquisition, the longer you can retain customers is one of the most profitable things in sales. So I like to look at it. Why do you do what you do? What's your purpose? Then how do you do what you do? And then the third thing is what you do. So really everything you've been trained on is I make this. This is how I make it. Do you want to buy some? And I'm saying it's like I make this because I'm trying to solve the problem, of this. This is how I do it, and this is the purpose I have around it. What I make is this, or what I do is this. So just think about, approaching your business in the fact of why, how, what. And I'd like to say it's actually why, who, how, what. Why do you do what you do? Who does it matter to most? How do you do it? And then what you do. And when you start thinking in those elements, and the companies I've helped in my consulting practice is one of the first things we do, in our first, exercises is this exercise. And I can, I've worked with a modular home company. And basically, when I walked into the room, they were kind of like, what do you do? And they're like, well, it's pretty simple. We sell houses. And I'm like, wow. And then we shifted the dialogue, got to the why, who, how, what. And then basically we realized that what we do is we provide homes to people. Homes is a place to call your own. Homes is something you have pride in. And it shifted their whole sales mentality and their sales process. Yes, they're selling, it's a modular thing that you're buying, but what you're buying, that why, that purpose is a place to call home. And just the simple difference between a home and a house, and to think of how that, in a sales process, and get you to your purpose. So why, who, how, what. So what is your why? So, that is one of those things, and you think about, and you can jot as I kind of go through this slide, but it's, what is your why? Well, why did you start doing, what you're doing? When I started my consulting practice in sales, why was I wanted to make sales a noble profession. I really didn't like that, people at a cocktail party wouldn't let people know that they're in sales. They felt like they weren't as prideful. So to me, sales, I've had a wonderful career in sales. I love sales. I love meeting people. I love learning what their problems are. I love sharing, my ideas on how to help them solve problems. So, but all of you have businesses or practices that are doing something. So what is your why? And then from that, what makes you unique? So what is your unique value proposition? How does your why actually help people, solve their problems? So, as you're sitting there, just jot it down. Why are you doing this? Because I know you're in a sales, webinar here, but why are you doing what you're doing? What inspired you to do this? What's your purpose? And then from that, jot down what your value propositions are, because that's a good exercise. And if you don't do it today, it's an exercise to do after the call, is really figure that out. Because as transactional sometimes as sales can be, that you have to get in front of somebody and sell, if you kind of have that inverted mentality of this is why I do it, this is what makes me, my value, and then you meet customers where they're at, And we're going to get to that, now, but it's like, this is the most important thing, because once you know this, you can start thinking about who the best target is for you. Who does your why matter to most? And in most organizations that I've worked with, this has been sort of an aha moment for them, is that it's really figuring out your target audience. Because I'm sure you're all looking at it, and your SCORE mentor has told you there's a total market, there's a serviceable market. Um, the way to look at that is, when you know your why, it helps you to know who to target. And a lot of people in the food and beverage space here, obviously you look at a Hannaford being a large retailer, you look at Whole Foods, but they're big operations. So how do you get to them? So, like, if you're doing something in that space, and maybe you're in the gluten-free space or you're in the vegan space, figure out who your customer is, figure out where they go to find those things, and then you start targeting them more. So yeah, Whole Foods could be a long-term destination, but there's all sorts of natural food grocers, and there's all sorts of little shops along the way, health and wellness stores. And maybe you take your sales strategy and start thinking of getting to those places first, so you can have people that will be really good customers to you. Because when your why matters to the customer you're talking to, they become your best advocate. They say that the best way to get a high sales closure rate is referrals. And if somebody refers you or feels good about what you do, and that's another one reason why you want to have a very strong customer target list. Because if your customers believe what you believe, they'll become referral partners, and those referral partners are the easiest sales to close. So really, one of the keys is finding your ideal customer. And when I do these kind of things live, or I do a workshop in person, we spend some time on this, going, all right, so you've identified your why. Now tell me, who's that ideal customer, and who do you want to share why you do what you do? So think about that, take a step back, like, all right, this is why I do it. This is who it matters to most, and put those two things together. And that's the start of the initial sales strategy for you. Have that target list of customers, because then what you can do is you can practice that empathy, which is basically the number one skill in sales right now. Because by practicing that empathy, when you know why you do what you do, you know who it matters to most, then you can start really investigating and doing the research on how you can approach that person and what's the best sales approach. And we're going to get through that when I talk about customer personas, and talk a little bit about meeting customers where they're at. But that's how you use empathy in sales, is making sure that you're talking to the right person and you're solving their problem. So what I like to do well, I see there's some things in the chat, Dan. Is there any questions that you want me to answer?
Oh, there's just someone asking about the slides, which we will be sending out.
Okay, great. So here's why I like to use empathy in sales. And it's an approach. But the first thing that showing empathy does, it gives you a really simple customer profile. Because the definition of empathy, right, is walking in somebody else's shoes. So by doing that, a simple profile, you'll start to think about that person more as just than a customer. You'll start thinking about what their values are. They start thinking about what they believe, what's their behaviors, what's their aspirations. And then when you know that, and you understand what your customer values, you'll understand what they're willing to pay for. That allows you to provide them value. It allows you to build trust with them, and it allows you to create the relationship, that one-to-one relationship that results in a sale, but also results in a long-term partnership. So I can't underestimate enough, how important empathy is. And it's that preparation before a sales meeting, right? If you're in sports, you don't go play a team, like the Patriots don't go play the Raiders without doing a full-on scouting report, of the Raiders, right? It's the same thing in sales. When you're going to see somebody and practicing that empathy, it's almost like you're preparing yourself to get to know that person, to build a relationship, and to provide them value. So I'd like to do a little exercise here, and I do this with, this is similar to a pattern that I'll do with my clients, right? We'll understand our why. We'll start working on our unique sales proposition, our unique value proposition. And then we start getting to, all right, we've got that defined. Let's start talking about our customers. So this is part of the, as I mentioned earlier, sales strategy, then sales process. So this is part of the sales strategy is really who is my customer? So the first thing I like to do, and I think it's important no matter where your business is at, is to build customer personas. And that's actually allows you to start getting to know your customers as people. Now they can be actual customers that you detail, but yeah, I just think it's very important that you do that. The next is, an exercise of customer identification, qualification, segmentation. Then it's like, how do I meet those customers where they're at, which is empathy. And then it's validating those unique value propositions to the customer. So who are these people? Get to know them through personas, kind of have an identification, qualification, segmentation, figure out how you can meet them where they're at, and then get in front of them and validate your UVPs to them. And then in a presentation mode, because you've done all that work, you've answered the questions of so what, who cares, what's in it for me. Because at the end of the day, your customer might not be saying that to you when they're sitting with you in a presentation, but in their mind, these are some of the things they're going through. So, I've done these for quite a while, and I've stuck with it. I actually have counter cards that say this. And actually, there was a group. I think that I went through the Top Gun program with a group of like 12 people. 5 or 6 years ago, and they happened to all be together in downtown Portland. I got out of my car and they yelled to me, "So what?" So it's something interesting to think about. But let me go through it. So building customers personas. This allows you to get an understanding of who your customers are as people. So that's very important. That's what empathy is, right? So, this person works at X and X. That's great, but who are they as people? That allows you to start, figuring out their goals and buying your product. It allows you to figure out the features and content that matter to them most. And then it helps you with the messaging that will help you find them in the first place. So we mentioned utilizing AI. If you have a better understanding of who your customers are as people and you feed that messaging cadence into an AI tool, it will give you messaging that relates to them. And there's a number of tools that actually, can help with that. But some examples of how I do that, it's, you're going to do your unique value proposition, and there might be 7 of them. That doesn't mean in every sales presentation you list all 7, because when you know your customer and you know what they value most, you might say number 7 on your list is actually number 1 to that customer, and number 2 on your list doesn't matter to them. So it allows you to cater and customize your presentation to the customer that you're meeting with. So customer personas, I find, are very, very important. And these are the kind of questions. I mean, this is how deep you really go, with customer personas. I mean, what are you answer the basic demographic, questions, but lifestyle, where do they hang out? Where do they live? What websites would they frequent? Where do they eat? What music do they listen to? What motivates them? Because when you can build these personas and start to figure that out, then all of a sudden, you're meeting them where they're at and you're building that connection. So I tell a story. I was working with a roofing company, and it was during the period of COVID, and we created a customer persona, and her name was Hazel. And this is how deep we got with Hazel. Hazel was recently widowed. She hadn't really made a big decision around the house. She always collaborated with her husband, but she never really made a big decision. And now she was on her own, and she needed to buy, a new roof. So we sort of detailed, some of the important things about Hazel. So we sent out, I was working with the roofing company. We sent out our roofing estimator to go meet with Hazel, and she had it, and he went in, and it was during COVID. So, it was a very tentative time. So, knocked on the door, she let him in, and he looked around. And, he basically saw all the pictures of her grandkids and her kids. And his first question wasn't about the roof. His first question was, I see all these pictures of your family. Have you been able to see them through COVID? And off she went. She started telling the story. She got into, he showed empathy. Like he felt like he saw what was important to her. And she went through, told some stories, built that trust with him. And then next thing you know, they talked about the roof. He offered her a proposal. And she said, I know this is a fair proposal because I built that trust with you. And he's basically sold that, roof right on. And he came back with that story and he was basically thankful that we did the work on personas because it helped him to not just go in and sell, it allowed him to be in the moment. And I think that's very important as you talk about sales as being in the moment. How you can influence these people. How do you get to know them, as people? Then the next thing in this is sort of like a customer segmentation. So, why it is important to understand your customer segments. And I use this on the right. I was happened to be fortunate to be the head of sales for a number of years at Puma, which is an athletic footwear company down in Massachusetts. If you're familiar with it, we just watched the World Cup. They had quite a few products at the World Cup, but we actually sold as a brand Dick's Sporting Goods, Foot Locker, Nordstrom, and Barney's of New York. So it was really key that you just couldn't sell all the same product to all those stores because the consumers are different, the mindsets are different, the purpose, Dick's is a sporting goods store, Foot Locker's a mall-based sort of specialty retail, Nordstrom's sort of a fashion store, Barney's is sort of an elite lifestyle store in New York. So, my questions I would have to ask myself is, what would I leverage in each of these, channels? How would I customize my product offering? How do you identify early adopters, by your segments? How do you make assumptions and test? How do you focus your efforts? And how do you manage your expectation? Because this helps you with your ideal customer journey, is that you might have multiple segments, you might have multiple products. And as you do that, how does this you create the ideal customer? Because each one of them, they want something, unique from you. So it's just something in your product might be simple. You might not have to have, segmentation. Some products do, but I put this in because it's just because you have a catalog of products doesn't mean that you just go sell it to everybody. Think about like getting the right product, and especially if you're in consumer products and people are reselling your product, make sure when you go in, you're placing that product, the appropriate product in the appropriate place that meets the needs of those customers. So that's very, very important. So we shifted. So that's your sales strategy. So you've kind of worked through, all right, we've got our customers, we know our why, we know our customers, we've got a kind of a customer segmentation plan. Now it's time to kind of executing what we call our sales process. And this sales process, so you've got all that, the work's done. Here's our purpose. Here's our UVPs. Here's our customer target list. Here it is. It's segmented. Here's our customer personas. Now let's talk about a sales process that helps you track the customer journey, right? So having that clear process is going to help you know where you're at and help increase the probability of your success. And sales process is going to help you manage your time and your activities to focus on what's important now. So to me, there's a number of ways you can do things, but really having a clear process, clear stages, knowing where you're at so that you aren't getting frustrated. If you still, if you don't have information on somebody, let's make sure you're qualifying folks in the right place in your pipeline. So basically, you're going to have customer identification and is part of your process, right? You're going to have prospects, which is a broad list of potential customers. You're going to have qualified leads. So those are people that maybe you have contact information on. Then there's potential customers who might fit, what you're doing. So one thing to note here as you lean down any sales funnel is that you need to be really big, at the top of your funnel, because as you go down through and qualify, it gets smaller and smaller. So most people I work with, especially, through SCORE or Main Center of Entrepreneurs, I think they underestimate the number of prospects they need to get to the sales number that they require. And so that's just one of those things, is that you have to be, not every prospect's going to be a qualified lead. So make sure that you're working through that. So I like to kind of like talk a little bit about leads versus prospects. And everyone can do it differently, but to me, leads are you've got a list of names and you've got a list of potential targets. To me, a prospect is somebody that all of a sudden now you have some contact information and you have a way to at least reach them. So to me, I consider leads more of a marketing initiative and prospects a sales initiative. But many people I know put leads and prospects together. But I like to think that, there's tons of things that are out there. There's tons of information that you can get, you can market to. But prospects becomes a sales term, and that I have to start thinking about ways to reach these people and contact them. And that gets back to marketing is one to many, sales is one to one. Sales, their job, and your job in sales in your business is to get prospects into qualified leads. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how to qualify a lead because I think that's one of the biggest things that you can do in your business to help you focus your time, focus your energy. So there's going to be 7 potential sales process stages, and you can create your own, but in an ideal world or in a CRM, you're going to have leads, prospects, then qualified leads. You're going to have people that are in discovery with you, people that are in capabilities, proposal, and then you're closing and getting a sale. So I'm going to talk a lot about qualified leads in the discovery because to me, those are the key aspects of sales. When you get somebody past discovery and they've asked you to tell them what you do, I'm assuming that you're all really good at that you know what you do, you're passionate about it. But in sales, the qualifying of leads and conducting that first discovery meeting, to me are the most important things you're going to be doing in your sales process. So I like to use what's called the BANT formula for qualifying a lead. So it's called budget, authority, need, timeline. So when I look at proposals and I look at probabilities, these are the questions I ask a sales team, and sort of the questions go like this. Number one, is the person you're talking to, do they have the budget or the resources to afford what you're doing? And if you check that box, yes, that's good. Then you've checked that. Authority, are you talking to the right person? And this is a very important one, especially it's a very important question to ask, especially if you're talking to, any kind of home improvement product, or, I use this example quite a lot from my family because I don't make a lot of decisions around my house, and I can't tell you how many, companies have come over to try to sell us some sort of product that we need, and they'll be assuming that I'm the authority figure in the transaction that they're selling, and it's a classic mistake they make because I don't know much about the stuff that they're talking about, but my wife is quite attuned to it. So it really is. And sometimes the key question is not, are you the right person to talk to? The key question is, let me know a little bit about your decision-making process and who should I be, meeting with to learn more about the problem to help you in your decision-making process. So in many cases that helps you, and people will tell you, here's our decision-making process. I do the screening. This person will review the proposals and we'll come together and collaborate. So then you're talking to the right person, and don't assume you're talking to the right person, just based on, their title. So it's a question to ask, talk a little bit about your decisioning process. Need, have you identified their pain in the discovery? So pain, we use that word. It's a word that's used quite a bit in sales training, but it's, have we identified those trigger points? So we have the issues that they're having that might, your service, your product, whatever you're doing might help them, might add value to what they're doing. And then timeline is like, when do they need it? So those are the 4, questions I like to ask because that helps you to tell you where to put your resources. So if somebody checks all 4 of these boxes and you have a clear timeline, you can start working towards actually closing the deal, making some things happen. For me, if you're not talking to the right person, you're really not moving the sales process along. You're having some nice meetings, you're learning a lot, but your chances of getting a sale are low if you aren't talking to the authority person. Obviously, if you haven't identified a need, or something that you help solve, you're going to have a hard time finishing the project. So all four of these are critical. I would say that, that it goes back to some will, some won't, so what? If you've answered budget, authority, and need, and you can't, close on the timeline, that tells you that's somebody you continue to follow up with because they haven't put a timeline on it, but you have answered the three top questions. So I would say in your frustration of your sales process, if you've answered three and you can't get timeline, keep going after it, be persistent. If you haven't answered any of these questions, then maybe you put it to the back burner of your sales outreach. But this is it's a really key, and you could use your own words here if you have your own company, vocabulary. I use this, and some of the people I work with, they have other terms. We plug it in. It doesn't have to be bad. It could be whatever is comfortable for you, but it's very important. And here's, I think, the one thing that if you could take away one thing, and it's about qualified leads, and then basically having that discovery meeting, because back to empathy being important, tactical flexibility. A sales presentation now looks a lot different. So first off, your qualified lead, you've identified them as having a need or a use for what you do. All right, so you've got that, you've checked that box. You've checked the authority box. You're talking to the decision makers. You've got the fact that maybe they buy and sell and do things similar to what you do. And then a sale is possible. And then you can manage the sales probability. So I think it's very important that go back. The discovery meeting is something that these are questions that you're asking, but you're trying to figure out what their pain point is. And in your first sales meeting, your discovery meeting, I like to think that the discovery meeting is 80% about them and 20% about you. So try to make sure you're asking as many questions as possible, gathering all those, different informations about their pain points, because then that helps you manage your sales probability. So then I look at the sales call. So you've done all this, you've done your customer identification, you've gotten to the qualified, leads, you set up an appointment. Now here we go. So the first thing I would say is be prepared. You've done all your research. You've done your empathy. You know who you're talking to. You've got the persona. So you're ready. You're prepared. I like to say to the students I teach is preparation is separation. So the more prepared you are to go into a sales call, the more you'll separate yourself from others that you're calling on. So know your customer and their pain points. So ask those questions. Really get to know them. And then when you get asked those questions, be really aware of how your UVP helps the customer. And I like to have an agenda flow for the meeting. Let them know that I've got just need 30 minutes of your time. And here's how I'm going to go through. I'm going to learn a little bit more about you. I've got some things I'll go through, but make sure these folks have an expectation for what the meeting's going to look like. One thing that's very important, and I'm not saying, I don't use the word close here, but know your ask. And your ask is if you want someone to give you a try in their store, if you want somebody to think about using your service, make that request. The one thing is it is a sales call. So people are expecting you to ask for something. Now, what I'm saying here is that, show the empathy, know what the customer's pain points are, make sure your presentation meets the needs and the timeline of the customer, but make sure you ask for something, because if you don't, then you're just, you're not going to perhaps get the deal. And I use it as like, people a lot of times like to use the word handling objections and closing. And I try not to use those words too often, because if you are prepared and you basically have shown the empathy, you've asked the questions, hopefully in that empathy mapping, you've figured out what some of the potential objections are going to be, and you've addressed that as you talk to the person because you've actively listened, you've learned. So, there's always going to be additional questions, but if you've done your preparation, the objections are ones that you should anticipate. And if you go on a few sales calls and you're finding objections, then I would say, look at what you're doing in preparation of, how do I not know those questions are coming up? And that allows you to learn from them, going forward. And the last thing I think that's really important is follow up and do what you say you're going to do. I'd like to follow up within 24 to 48 hours after a meeting, thanking people for getting together, offering, this is what we talked about. This is what I'm going to do. And there's all sorts of tools that can help you with that. So that's very important. So as you go out and start to sell, all of you, there's some don'ts and do's. Like, so you don't want to wing it. You don't want to wait for customers to call. You don't want to dive right into business. You don't want to talk about fear and scary times and things like that. You don't want to talk in jar. Every industry has terminology. You don't want to talk in jargon. You don't want to be dismissive or condescending, and you don't want to be distracted. What you do want to do is you want to have bullet points to highlight your key points. You want to be proactive. You want to inquire about your customers, show empathy, ask how they're feeling. Be really clear. Clarity is clever. Basically, be clear on what you're asking for. Be reassuring and confident, and then be focused and attentive. And if you do those things, then what you are going to be doing is you'll set yourself apart, and that preparation will be the preparation. So I just say, so many products, so many customers, so little time. Number one, create a pipeline 8 to 10 times the business need. And that could be small, but make sure you've got that prospect pipeline big enough. Be ready for many, many touches. I mean, 15 plus. I was working with a salesperson last year, and he said, "You know what? I've reached out to this customer 4 times. They haven't gotten back to me. I'm going to give up." And I'm like, his name was Henry. I'm like, "Henry, call me when you've called them 15 times, because 4, you haven't even scratched the surface." So be prepared for the number of touches. Know your ideal customer profile. Back to, why do you do what you do? Who does it matter to most? Also know your non-ideal customer profile. And one mistake, I've seen a lot of organizations or even individuals make, is that they spend a lot of time on a customer that doesn't believe what they believe, might not be interested, but has asked for a proposal or is shopping for something. No, they're not your ideal customers. Sometimes saying no to something will help you clarify what you're doing and keep you from avoiding, some mistakes. And I can tell you, that's one of the biggest things I've learned in my sales career. Sometimes the sales you don't make are as important as some of the sales you make. So you want to be doing business with people who believe what you believe, who share some of your values. I mean, you're going to be transactional with some, but really do know who you don't want to be selling. Categorize and create separate channels so that you know that in your empathy, this person will be thinking for these kinds of products, this person will think that way. And I think the last point here is, not all customers are alike. So each of them have their own pain points, their own purposes. So make sure that in your system, whatever you're using, whether it's a CRM or just an Excel spreadsheet, make sure that you're getting the detail in, so that you're not doing a cookie cutter approach for your customers. So this is it. So the biggest believer is your best salesperson. That's all you. So, you are the best salespeople I've ever met. Find your ideal customer. Know who's not your ideal customer. Walk in their shoes. Show empathy. Solve their problem. Know your UVP. Know why you do what you do, and leverage it as much as you can. Know your ask, and what know your ask. What do you want from the meeting? And some will, some won't, so what? And if you can kind of live to these 6 points, I think you're all set up for some successful creative sales activity. So that being said, Dan, I guess we'll open it up to some questions. I can stop sharing.
Yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free. You can unmute your microphone and feel free to ask Tom.
Hey guys, how are you doing? Hey Tom, how are you?
Hey,
Sam
hey,
Nelson.
Sam. How are you?
Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Great content. Love this. Definitely look forward to putting this to action. So I'm doing a slight repivot and I'm really committing fully to the sales job that I know what I need to do. 15 touches is really some astonishing number. I'm like, all right, I'll send an email, a couple of calls or texts. I'm like, all right, these guys are they don't want to talk to me. How do I get over this notion? Like, all right, I really don't want to bother. I don't want to bother people. But like, if I've called and I texted a couple of times, like, I start to get the feeling like they really do not want to talk to me. How do I get over that?
It's a great question.
Hurdle?
I get that from sales, people all the time. And some maybe is how you define touches. So,
Yeah.
the networking events, if you know the type of places that your people go for networking events or learning opportunities, make sure you show up, that you're participating in those types of events. It's really back to that empathy mapping. Know where these customers might be, know the right time to meet them. And, email boxes are full. So one thing
Yeah.
I do with sales teams is like, look at your pattern. So if you're like, for you might say Fridays is the best day for me to do prospecting. Well, Fridays are the worst day to get a hold of a customer. So
Yeah.
think about it. Think about scheduling your email releases. Do it now. Say I'm going to send 3 different emails. I'm going to do one on a Tuesday morning, one on a Thursday afternoon, and one on a Sunday night. And stagger that. And some of the most successful outreach I've seen is that when people start thinking purposefully about, the timing of their messaging, sort of the content of their messaging, use AI to say, feed what you want to do. I've got 15 touches I want to make. Feed it, and perhaps they'll give you, some recommendations. But the number one thing, and I think some people, don't use it, is most email services allow you to schedule email deliveries.
Yeah.
So, and I recommend that highly to salespeople is think about your audience. This is, a true story of one of the clients I work with. They were struggling to meet. There's one highly successful, like a 40-year-old woman who owned a business, and this one sales rep says, "I'm beating my head against the wall trying to get in to see her." And I'm like, "Well, let's take a step back. What's her life like? And tell me, what do you think the best time to reach her might be?" And we talked about it, and he scheduled an email to get to her at 10 o'clock at night. And he got an email back at 10 o'clock that night. "So sorry, I've missed you," because he realized she's busy. She's dropping, she's doing this. She's working at running a business. That was the right time. So everyone's different. Another client I work with, he was trying to get to somebody in the HVAC business, and they were interested and they had some qualification. And I'm like, "Well, the time to get them is before they go on the road at 6:30 or 7 in the morning."
Yeah.
So knowing your customers, knowing their pattern, because I think so. First I'd get a little creative in your messaging and your outreach. And for you and your business, I'd probably think about networking and where are those events, where are those places that person might be.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be stalking them, but part of it is being seen, right? "Oh yeah, Sam was there. Now he's here." I can't tell you how many times in my practice I've gone somewhere and the next day I get an email from someone going, "Hey, I saw you there last night. Sorry I missed you. We really need to circle back and get a coffee to talk about that."
Yeah. Yeah. On that note, next week, the Main Biz is doing their small business forum report. So
Yeah, I'll be there.
yeah, good. I'll see you there too.
We'll
We're
network
not
together.
I don't monopolize thing, but what about LinkedIn, like direct messaging and like reaching out to people who are maybe on your list, either they're with the company that you want to target, like just cold, linking in with people. Is that effective, or is that?
Yeah, I use LinkedIn in the consulting practice. I use LinkedIn quite effectively. What you don't want to do is be outwardly selling on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
My goal on LinkedIn is to get a coffee meeting or to just, get connected, because then your content becomes of interest. So I wouldn't recommend overly selling on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Your whole idea on LinkedIn is to be a content expert or a subject matter expert. So getting connected with somebody as you post things, they might get interested in some of the things you're posting. So my goal is try to get the first degree connection. Don't oversell. The worst thing I hate, I don't know everybody else, but when I connect with somebody and I get a ding right away trying to sell me something. So
Yeah.
I'd be casual on it, especially in your field. We have a lot of shared interests, a lot of shared connections. I'd like to connect. And then when you're connected, they do get all your content. And then if you're connected, you see what they're working on too. So I can't tell you how many times I've seen a LinkedIn post from a first degree contact that I thought was interesting. And I would write to them saying, "I think this is very interesting. I'd love to learn more." And next thing you know, we're in a coffee and it just goes. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Let me see if I hear you correctly. LinkedIn is sort of like a business card. It's kind of like a touch and go, right? It's like meeting someone in a network and then handing your card and saying, "Let's get together at some time. What you're doing is pretty interesting and maybe we can collaborate." Now, my question is, if I want to get customers and I want them to buy a service, what would be the right amount of money to start per month for marketing? And what avenues should I be using predominantly? Like, is Facebook more effective than Instagram, or just depends on your actual business?
Well, I think for you, Amber, it goes back to your customer target. So, if you started looking at customer personas, that would tell you if your customer persona is 50 plus, Facebook is where you go. So Instagram sort of fits. So TikTok, if you're going after younger people. So I think it really comes down to that customer identification and customer kind of personas, and that's going to help you in marketing to figure out where they're at. So that's why customer identification is a marketing and sales tool that we both do together, because it does help you to figure out where to meet people where they're at. So that's what I would recommend for you is like, here's why I do it. Here's some customer targets. Here's who it matters to. And then you can start figuring out where to meet them. So
Okay.
like for in Sam's case, his people probably do go to networking events. Your people
Right.
might be social media. So not there's no consistent answer, but it does come back to knowing your customer, knowing where they might be, and then showing empathy and meeting them where they're at. So that's what I'd recommend first, and then start thinking about what's the best formula from there.
And how much should you be spending per month on marketing?
Well, are
I
you
know it's a
pre-revenue?
hypothetical question, but I've been, looking into help, and I've been getting different quotes and amounts, and I'm trying to figure out what's the best strategy. But I do hear what you're saying, and I
In
think
my
that will
practice,
also
it's always
determine it.
I've always kind of looked at it as 10% of revenue. But if you're pre-revenue, then I think you just have to set a budget,
Hmm.
for how many people you wanna reach. So I think that goes back to your prospecting list. If you want to reach 1,000 people, what formula gets me there. But standard business, most places I've been, you don't really want to spend much more than 10% on your actual outreach, because at some point that starts impacting your margin.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I was working with a startup, and we were looking. I mean, just minimum on Amazon, we were going to have to spend 10,000 a month, but we were trying to scale a business. So it's really setting a budget for yourself and how many customers you want to reach, how many sales you want to go. So I'd probably look with even with your Score Mentor, kind of do a financial model is, based on this target, based on this revenue goal, how many people do I need to reach? And then I'd probably back into it to say, all right, this is how much I'll spend in marketing per month. Do you have that financial plan in place?
Yeah, but I do need to revise it because I finally got a location. So I'm kind of starting from scratch again.
Okay. Yeah, I
So
would
I'm
work with your
replugging in my
financial.
numbers and figuring that out.
Yeah, Score has some great resources that can help you with that. I mean, do you have a subject? Do you have a mentor at Score?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Her
would.
name's,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I'm working with Anna.
Okay. I'm a subject matter expert, and Dan can speak to it. I come into a lot of calls when like the person gets you the financials. I've been on a lot of Score calls this month where people bring me in just to kind of answer some specific questions. So if you want to talk to Anna, say, hey, I was on Tom's webinar at our next mentoring session. At the end, can we take, let's do this work, and then he can help me at the last 15 minutes or something. But please, yeah, that's part of what my role is here at Score. As a sales subject matter expert, I jump on those calls to help individual clients.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll arrange that. I
Sure.
appreciate it.
Thanks.
We did have one question in the chat asking about the networking event that you were referencing in Freeport.
Yeah, that's a Main Biz small business event. It's next Wednesday. So if you go onto the Main Biz website and look up events, it's a small business forum. It's the Freeport Hilton Garden Inn, I want to say. And Main Biz runs great events. I'll tell you, like in my consulting practice, going to Main Biz events has been, tremendous. They allow time for networking. There's a lot of learning. They set it up in a way that they're there to help businesses meet people, get better. So it's a very welcoming, networking event.
Thank you. Great. I'll be there.
All right.
Do we have any more questions today? All right. Thank you very much, Tom, for kind of diving into sales with us today. We really appreciate it. I'll be sure to get the slide deck for this out, as well as a recording of this workshop as well. And I'll make sure to include your email for anyone who might have any follow-up questions.
Sure, that'll be great.
Thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody. Have a
Thank
great
you.
rest of the
Thank you.
weekend.
Thanks, Dan.
Bye-bye.